Hey everyone, and thanks for jumping back into the cryptoverse. Today we're going to talk about Ethereum and the fact that we are wrapping up December, which, as we know, historically speaking, 5 years in a row at various points throughout December was a great time to buy Ethereum against Bitcoin. We're not saying that it's going to happen again. We're just saying that the last 5 years in a row, it would have worked out really well. If you guys like the content, please subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up. Also, check out the Telegram channel, which you can find a link to in the description below. Let's go ahead and jump in. So, before we get started, there's a lot of, there will be some fairly bullish extrapolations to some degree. Again, this is not financial advice, nothing like that. We're just looking at historical trends. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to measure the Ethereum Bitcoin ROI, so the Ethereum ROI against Bitcoin, starting December 1st and measure it out for 120 days. We did this a month ago and we just showed the last 5 years. Now we're going to put in 2020 so far. So looking at it this way, it's kind of hard to see what's going on. You have 2015 and 2016 doing quite well. 2017 went up and then back down. And then 2018 and 2019 were more or less humdrum, with 2020 trending down initially. Now, one thing we can do is we can color code them. And if you watched the last video on this topic about a month ago, you'll already know what these color coding lines are for. If it's green, it means Bitcoin is above its 20-week moving average. If it's red, it means the entire time Bitcoin was below its 20-week moving average. And if it's yellow, it means that when it started, it was above, or basically at some point it was above it and some point it was below it. So in this sense, in 2017, at some point Bitcoin was above it, and then at another point Bitcoin was below it in terms of the 20-week moving average. And this would be like, December of 2017, because we know that it broke it in January, but that was over the next 120 days. So we noticed that the two red lines were more or less not a huge gain. We saw some maybe 50%, 60% moves against Bitcoin or so over the time period, but not a huge gain, of course. But if you at least 50 to 60% from the bottom in December, not necessarily as measured from December 1st. The yellow one, of course, that was when Bitcoin had its major blow off top at the end of 2017. Ethereum still did fairly well against Bitcoin over the next couple months, so it's just later it trailed off. And then the 2 years where it did phenomenal were 2015 and 2016. We know that during that time, the end of 2015 into 2016, Bitcoin was in fact above its 20-week moving average, and it maintained itself above it throughout Q1. So this year has trended down in the short term, pretty much similar to this year, that ultimately ended up giving us a 10x. Now, of course, I don't think that we're going to see a 10x against Bitcoin in the next 90 days or anything close to it. I would expect diminishing returns of the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation, but it gives you an idea that just because we've trended down in the short term, well, this year did as well, and it did not preclude it from continuing to trend up as we got into the new year. One of the things we can look at is the averaged 90-day ROI of Ethereum against USD denominated by month. And one of the things you notice is that having bought Ethereum in December every single year, you would have been up 90 days later, right? Here you would have been up over 10x. Here it would have been around 4x. This one would have been around maybe a little over 2x. This one wouldn't have been that impressive, maybe 1.4x or so, 1.3x. This one a little over 1x, and yet we don't know what this one will bring us. One of the things you notice too is that in the first year, October would have had a lower 90-day ROI than November, which would have had a lower 90-day ROI than December, and then the same thing for the following year. And then this one runs the same trend, and then this one is sort of the same trend, except November was slightly higher than December. The main one that has the reverse trend is 2017, when Bitcoin had the major blow off top. Okay, so that was when Ethereum basically peaked in January, meaning that buying in October, your 90-day ROI would have been the best, because if you were buying in November and waiting 90 days, then it meant you were selling in February after it crashed. So generally speaking, your ROI, your 90-day ROI, goes up as you continue throughout the fourth quarter, historically speaking. Here's the 1-year ROI. It generally trended up for a couple years, and it came down into the bear market, and I suppose we are starting to trend back up again. So again, this is if you had bought in 2019, but if this trend continues, right, and we're comparing, say, if you had bought Ethereum in, say, Q1 of 2020, what would your 1-year ROI be? Well, if you had been buying it back then, maybe it was around $200. To get to a 10x, it would need to get to $2,000, which isn't that far-fetched, I guess. I mean, it's definitely quite a move from where we currently are, and I know it can certainly seem far-fetched now, but I feel like over the next year or so, it might not seem as far-fetched as it might right now when we're sitting in a $740 Ethereum. Now, this is my favorite chart. This is one of the most interesting charts I can show you, and it's probably one of the most bullish for Ethereum. Okay, so our thesis for a while is that in terms of volatility, Ethereum is one market cycle behind Bitcoin. Okay, and this is the 1-year ROI of Bitcoin. You notice that this one is around 100x 1 year. It's closer to 200. It's like maybe 150x or so, but let's just call it 100x in this year. We can look at Bitcoin and see that, okay, well, its last market cycle, well, the one before this one, peaked at around 100x, okay? Then the next one peaked at around 30x or 25x or so. This is the 1-year ROI, meaning if you had bought Bitcoin 1 year and say, like, let's say you bought it in, December of 2016, what was the 1-year ROI in December of 2017? So this, and that you can see this would have been in December of 2017, it would have been about a 25x or so had you just waited, you bought it and then sold it 1 year later. Now, let's look at this chart and then look at that one, okay? 100x 1-year ROI, about 100x 1-year ROI. The next one ended up being about a 25x ROI in 1 year. Right now, the 1-year ROI is closer to around 5x or so, and this is had you bought, right, a year ago. Now, if we were to continue, we would need to, this is overlaying it with Bitcoin, right? Look how, this is the Bitcoin chart. Let's overlay it. Look how well, I mean, if we stretch it and make the times line up exactly, peak, second peak, bear market, move up, sideways, trend back up. Bitcoin trended up to a 25x 1-year ROI. Ethereum is currently trending up. So the question, right, is how high will it trend up? Okay? If it were to trend back up to this trend line, which somehow it's hard to see now, but it's running right through this peak and this peak. If it trends up to that point, like it did with Bitcoin, it would imply maybe a 25x ROI. Well, is that possible? Well, if you think about it, there was a March crash in 2020. Ethereum went lower than $100. So I would say that the best chance for Ether to see a 25x ROI in the short term would be for it to, ultimately trend to $2,500 by the March crash, like by an anniversary of the March crash. So 1 year from the last March crash, this coming March, if it were to reach $2,500, then that would essentially get it on par with that move from Bitcoin. Of course, we do know that the one for Bitcoin did take 4 years. Okay, from this peak to this peak. If we go back from here into 2013 to into 2017, the 100x to the 25x was approximately 4 years apart. So this one, I have it drawn up to basically go midway through 2021, which there's a good chance that wouldn't happen. Now, for it to happen later on, if we were to say somehow experience the 25x ROI of Ethereum later in 2021 or say 2022, sometime later, well, imagine it were to happen in, say, the middle of 2021. Well, it would be a lot harder for us to get to 25x at that point, right? Because if you think about it, if Ethereum is, let's say it's, I don't know, what was it, at $400, right? If it's $400, a 25x ROI would imply $10,000 Ethereum, which doesn't seem that likely, right? That doesn't seem that likely, not in the short term. I mean, I'm not convinced that Ethereum will make it to 5 figures this market cycle. I'll probably be out well before that, but it would certainly be a lot harder for it to get to a 25x from, from say $400 or $500. I mean, with the price of Ethereum right now, if we just let me just pull up my calculator. If the price of Ethereum right now is $750, a 25x from that is $18,000, which seems fairly absurd. So I would say the best way for Ethereum to reach a 25x, like Bitcoin did, would be for it to hit that 25x mark earlier, right? Earlier rather than trending later in 2021, because the later it goes, then the higher it has to go to get to a 25x ROI. So we'll see what happens. Again, I know that a 25x ROI from from $80, which I think is around where it went or so, from $80, a 25x ROI is around $2,000. So it seems certainly like it's possible, given that we're at $750. It seems like a 25x ROI in terms of the 1 year ROI is possible. We're already at a 7 to 8x this year. So it's certainly not that absurd, especially if we get into blow off bubble type mentality in the short term. But anyways, I just want people to recognize the possibilities, but also recognize that it might not trend the same way that Bitcoin did. Our theory is that it's one market cycle behind Bitcoin in terms of volatility. But if that were exactly the case, then it would take it another year to get to, say, around a 25x ROI, which would then, of course, imply a much higher price. So anyways, let me know what you guys think. Hopefully this video has been useful. Sometimes it's fun to just make these comparisons against Bitcoin and just see how similar these two charts are in lieu of the idea that Ethereum could be one market cycle behind Bitcoin in terms of its volatility, right? In terms of its volatility. So of course, we'll see where Ethereum takes us. Remember the end of December, because we've said before, every single December so far has led to a pretty decent ROI of Ethereum against USD and Ethereum against Bitcoin. Typically, especially against Bitcoin, at least a 50 to 60% ROI sometime in Q1. We'll reiterate, there's no free lunch. I have no idea if it's actually going to play out. We're just looking at the historical pattern and noting that, we've seen this happen before. We're in a bull market. At least Bitcoin seems to be in a bull market. It's been going crazy the last few months. If it can cool down in Q1, then maybe Ethereum can finally spread its wings. If it can't, and Bitcoin volatility remains extremely high to the upside or the downside, then likely we won't see Ethereum break out against Bitcoin. Remember, if Bitcoin were to drop to the 20-week and then go below it, this typically would not be a good thing for Ethereum. Another thing to consider is that in the event of a 30% correction by Bitcoin, where it still holds the 20-week moving average as support, that could catalyze Ethereum. But in the short term, there could be a knee-jerk reaction capitulation of Ethereum. So it could lead to a capitulation of Ethereum against Bitcoin before it takes off. So there have been events like that in the past where Bitcoin has to, definitively end its run and see a fairly nice capitulation before Ethereum will take off. And until then, Ethereum's essentially playing in the sandbox. Now, there's other times where that hasn't been the case, and Ethereum will just start to trend up quickly whenever Bitcoin starts moving sideways. We've seen already some elements of that during this cycle. There was a time in November, and then in the summer, Bitcoin was trending sideways at a bullish level above the 20-week moving average, and Ethereum started to break out. But whenever Bitcoin wants, it can reclaim that bullishness from Ethereum by starting to move again. So ultimately, it boils down to whether or not Ethereum, or whether or not Bitcoin the volatility of Bitcoin will cool off sometime in Q1. Okay, and sometimes the Ethereum move doesn't happen until closer to the end of January, or it starts at the end of January. Remember, it's Q1; it can span 3 months. So we will come back and revisit these charts after Q1. So maybe April 1st or sometime early April, we'll come back and look at our damage report and see, what happened, right? How well did it work out? Did it do what we were hoping, right? Did Ethereum trend up against Bitcoin in Q1, where it makes it look like, again, that December was a phenomenal buy against Bitcoin? Or will this be the first year where we have a completely different trend? Again, I don't know. This is not financial advice. There's no free lunch, etc. You guys get it. In terms of, we're just looking at the data and we are speculating on what would happen if this same trend were to continue. If you guys like the content, remember we do have the premium list. You can find access to the sale in the description below. Make sure you sign up before January 3rd if you want to sign up before the prices go up. You get access to the Telegram alerts channel where I put out frequent alerts, the private chat room on Telegram, the weekly premium videos, the weekly premium reports, the risk dashboard, the trading view indicators, and a few more things. Make sure you guys check it out. The sale will end on January 3rd, so you can lock in the lower rate before that. And again, you can find the link to that in the description below. Make sure you guys subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, click the bell icon to turn your notifications on, and I will see you next time. Bye.